Very happy to just give a little brief introduction for our speakers tonight. We've got Graham Tennant and not Graham's wife, Molly Power. Graham Tennant, he was in our RCA class actually last year and had the privilege of doing his marriage preparation with his wife, Hillary. And he's a great guy. He's a good golfer, I know that. I think, if I recall, didn't you score like the best score on the Focus, the premarital inventory that we do? If I recall, I think Graham had the best score.
It was probably up
I've ever
there.
had. So what that means for the guys is that he actually knows what he's doing. So I would say you could listen to him. For the ladies, maybe this is the kind of guy you're looking for.
My wife's out of town.
Molly Power, I've known her for a long time. We've been friends for a long time, since I came to her rescue in a parking lot back in the day. And she's a great lady. She's been growing for a long time. She's been studying about the theology of the body, and it's really become a specialty for her. She's taught high school for a number of years, and then she just recently started working for Ruah Woods in Cincinnati. She's actually developing a theology of the body curriculum, and she's really, I think, got a great level of expertise in terms of how God made us and how we interact together. So very happy to have here Molly and Graham.
Yeah. So I sat in this last year, and one of the questions Father Luke asked was, what would we do different, or what I would have liked to seen done last year if we could have done it. And I said, most of the time in a group setting like this, people don't want to ask questions, in front of other people. And, everybody has questions. I know when I sat in, I had questions. And when I got out of this talk, I talked to my fiance at the time. I said I had all these questions, but I didn't want to, put myself out there. So I think what would be a good idea, I think, Sean, did you get paper, is just take the first 5 minutes and just put a question down that you want to ask. I mean, obviously we don't know anybody's handwriting, and you can ask anything. We'll try to answer it. If I can't answer it, maybe Molly can, and if not, hopefully Sean can. So I think just take the first 5 minutes, you can ask any question you want on the subject. And then after 5 minutes, we'll kind of get into, chastity and all that fun stuff. So I will say my wife was supposed to be here. She's pregnant, and she sometimes has a slip of the mind. And so she actually booked a flight to go see her parents on Sunday and totally forgot that we had this. And she was going to do most of the talking, and then when I reminded her we had this, she said, well, now you can do all the talking. So I'm no expert, but I'll just tell you what my experience is. So, but let's get those questions going. If you don't have a question, obviously don't write one down.
Do you want to tell them all the questions at the end?
Yeah, we'll do questions at the end as well. So maybe we'll stop in the middle and answer some of the questions, and then you can write more questions. I will wait for everybody's questions. I expect to have about 40 questions. My neighbors were actually in Arizona as well. They called me like, oh, we're in Arizona. Their daughter lives there, and she just had a baby. I was like, my wife's about an hour from you. And they get back at the same time, fly back at the same time, but they fly in the midway. She was like, you could have picked her up. I was like, that'd be nice. So. When I read these questions, I can't make fun of the people. Like what I normally do. It's a terrible question.
And then I found $5.
So maybe I'll just pass it.
It's a moment in my life, Allison. I can't believe you didn't appreciate very much. I didn't unappreciate it. I just don't want to. I heard you. Wait, Mia, did you see this? Oh, no, I don't know. I was like, Here. You wanted that. So I mean, I already had a laugh that was obnoxious, so I knew it was obnoxious. Yeah.
I know.
These are all on this side.
Good. We get out like 8:30. 8:30.
That's for me.
I don't really know where this is gonna go, so I just figured I'd come in.
You got good questions.
Oh, here's the thing.
Hope you have some good answers.
I like that one.
This is like the face you're making.
Good. Third one.
It's amazing that has like
Tough questions. Not the questions I have.
Reps we can take to be sure. You're going to answer that a little bit, I think. Thanks.
Being strange. All right, so we can start. So again, these are going to be my real life examples. So what is the point of dating? So in Christian dating, you should be dating someone to discern marriage. If you're dating someone for fun, it's a lot easier to objectify them because they're the object of your fun. On the other hand, if you are actually discerning marriage, and that's the clear goal in mind, it's much easier to want what is best for that person, including but not limited to being, chaste. Because either you're dating them and viewing them as your future spouse, or if you're at the point where you're not and break up, you're looking at that person as someone else's future spouse. So when me and my wife first started dating, and this is probably the second date we had, the first date she tried to stand me up, but it's a true story. I was very persuasive to get, the first date, and then I was in. So probably on the second date, she told me, I'm not here just for fun, I want to see if you're right for marriage. And because of that, she also did not want to have sex. She told me that from the very beginning. So she set very clear boundaries and put her intentions out there very early on. And because of that, it helped us create a stronger relationship. It allowed the mental / relational side to catch up with the physical attraction. And we were able to discuss big things in our life without having the deeply emotional attachment that's created by the physicality. So too often the physical side becomes the dominant force in a relationship early on. I'm sure, if you've ever dated someone, the first week or two, you're probably constantly texting them, you think they're the best thing ever, and you just always want to be around them, and all you're thinking about is that person, and probably a lot more physical than emotional. So it's, smart to kind of just slow down and my wife explained, you have the emotional side and the physical side with this being marriage. So if you're too physical, if you're not building up together at one point and physical time kind of takes over, you have the emotional here and then it just crumbles. Likewise, if you're too emotional, you're just putting yourself out there telling things that, should probably wait a couple months to be said, and you're scaring someone off and you have stage 5 clinger, like you just, it's time to go. So, with the emotional side, it's important that, again, what is the point of dating? The point of dating is to eventually probably marry. That's what most people date. And if you keep that in mind, set the boundaries early, you have a clear goal in sight. So I'll let Molly speak more of that later. So I'm just going to tell 2 or 3 stories, and then she's going to jump in. So another story I'm talking about is practice makes perfect. So even if you both intend to get married, why practice chastity? So other than it's what you're supposed to do. So when you get married, it doesn't mean all of a sudden everything is acceptable and good times by all at all times. So my wife is currently pregnant, and there's times during her pregnancy where she is 100% off limits. I cannot be physical with her. There's going to be times after the baby's born that I know I cannot touch her. And, because we were chaste early on, and throughout our whole dating period, it allowed us to kind of practice and, have this, in mind that, we're not going to objectify each other. She's just not some, object to fulfill me every time I want to be physical with her. I have to show her love outside the physical part. So that could be for me, having deep conversations with her because she loves those, or rubbing her feet, knowing that nothing's going to come of it aside from, my hands getting tired. She loves to tickle me, and I absolutely hate it. And when she has had a bad day or we can't be physical, she will I give her 30 seconds every day. And she will always use those 30 seconds. It is terrible. I'm really ticklish. But she gets a lot of enjoyment and love of it, even though it's a lot of pain for me. So, the practice of dating chastely prepared us for a stronger marriage. So it was those items, while we were dating that, we figured out, this is something, or I figured out this is something she really likes. I can see that she gets a lot of enjoyment out of it, and she knows that, I'm just not doing this just, to get something from her later on. So the third story is the side effects. So if not chaste emotionally and physically, people get hurt. So this happens because you're emotionally or physically intimate with someone. When you're doing that, you're giving a piece of yourself to that person. So once given, you can never take that back. So maybe you tell your current dating, you're dating someone and you tell them a really deep, dark secret, and 2 days later they break up with you. Well, they're always going to have that with them. Or maybe you're physical with them, very early on, and then that person says, well, see you later. And well, you gave that to them. You can't take it back. So an example I had was I was kind of seeing this girl for a very short period of time, and we jumped into the physical aspect, way too early. And the next day after we did the very first thing, I really regretted it. And it wasn't because she was not attractive. It was just that my attraction for this girl was completely out the window. I know that sounds terrible, but I think it's pretty common with guys, and probably is with girls as well, where, if you hook up with someone early on, it's like, okay, I don't want to see that person anymore. I just don't like them, and it's mainly because the emotional part hadn't caught up with the physical part. So that really did hurt her. It took a piece of her that she gave me, and she wasn't ready to give, and I wasn't ready to accept it either. I know, again, the story sounds terrible, but the same thing has happened to a lot of my guy friends and probably girlfriends. They just don't tell me that part. Guys tell me stuff. This also had an adverse effect on my future relationships. I was getting in the habit of just hurting people, taking things away from them instead of having both of us be better after dating each other. My wife has a really good story of, actually it was the guy before she dated me. They dated for a very brief short time, like 2 or 3 weeks. He was actually from Colorado. They met on a camping trip, and he flew out to see her for a couple days, and she did the same thing. And after 4 or 5 days of hanging out, they're like, this isn't going to work. You're great, but we're just not for us. And They kind of gave a high five, and they walked away. And he's married now, and she's married to me. And she said, both of them got, a better understanding of what a relationship really means because they went into it as discerning marriage. So there's a beautiful buildup that allows for the emotional and physical sides to build up at the perfect rate, reaching their pinnacle in marriage. But how does this all play out in real life? I think, and again, this is my opinion, for girls, there's nothing more attractive than or enticing than setting boundaries like my wife did. And guys, there's nothing more attractive than respecting a girl who has set those boundaries or setting those boundaries yourself. You both want to walk away wanting more, not feeling like you've already had too much. And love is a circle that always leaves you wanting more. It's not aligned with an ending. So with that, turn it over to Mallory.
Thanks, Graham. So when we originally, Hillary and I actually got together to talk about what it was that we were going to talk about during this talk. And the idea was that Graham and Hillary were going to share a little bit more of the experiential life stories, and that I was going to share a little bit more of the what the church teaches, vision casting sort of thing. So my goal is to do that as beautifully as possible. So I do kind of ask you to bear with me and kind of join me in thinking through why it is that the church would want to make such a big claim on us. So a couple of the questions that we have up here, one of my favorite, why bother with chastity? Seems restrictive, period. So why does the church give us this thing that seems like a demand that seems restrictive? Is it that, or is it something else? So to sort of set a foundation for what it is that the church is saying, I think we need to start with the fact that the body has a meaning. And this is something that right now, Father mentioned that I am writing curriculum for theology of the body. So right now I'm actually writing curriculum for kindergartners. So I've been thinking about what can I teach a kindergartner about theology of the body. So, it's like this chunk of a book that John Paul II wrote, and it's all very phenomenological and theological, philosophical. So how can I take that and help it make sense to a kindergartner? So the starting point was this, that the body has a meaning, and that we see that in our own experience. So that's where John Paul II starts with theology of the body. He starts with Adam's been put in this garden. He's made in the image and likeness of God. And by being in this garden, he's going to learn some things about himself. So kind of within that picture, Adam is created in the image and likeness of God, and then he's given a task. And his task is that he's supposed to keep until this garden. And then he's given a second task, and the second task is that he is to name animals. So in this, John Paul II describes it that Adam is, as he names these animals, in search of his essence, in search of his meaning, in search of who he is. Maybe familiar experience for a lot of you, right? Looking for who I am and wanting to understand myself. So as he's naming things about creation, he starts to see things about himself. So a couple of things that he sees. His work sets him apart. He was asked to keep until the garden. That was not given to the lions. It was not given to the bears. That was a task for him. He was the protector and the keeper of this garden. A very human task. And that was an invitation into the work that God himself is doing in the garden. God is the one who's giving everything life, right? The Father creates everything. And so as all of this is created, he's given this task to watch over it and to care for it and to work. And so his work is already in and of itself a participation in the life of God, in keeping things alive. So that's really important. And then as he's naming things, he gets to see, again, that everything is given to him. There's a gift, right? That he's the pinnacle of creation. He's the greatest thing. But there's all of these things that are for him. He's given all of the trees. He's given all of the fruits. He can eat of all of these things except for the one tree. Everything in the garden is there for him. So again, it's a way that he participates in even the knowledge of God, right? He's given this creature and he gets to name it. So it's sort of It's his, it has belonging, he has ownership over it, that kind of thing. And then he's given this command that he can eat from any of the trees he wants except from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And if he eats from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he will die. So for Adam, for us, for human beings, we all know that there was a time that we did not exist. And so it means that for us, non-existence is a part of our nature. It's there. We're aware of it. So even though it's hard to conceive of, we can conceive of this, like, there was a time that I wasn't, therefore there could be a time that I'm not. And so he's aware of his creatureliness, right? Like, he looks like all of these animals. There are things he shares in relationship with creatures, with plants, with animals. But yet he's different. There's something about him that's still even ever greater, right? So he has this consciousness. He's walking with God in the cool of the evening. He's talking to him. So he's the only creature that is created by God for his own sake, right? All of these plants and animals and other things are for Adam. But Adam is because God wants him to be. And then God gives him this whole world. And so this is really important because he sees all of these things in his body, right? His body is different from the body of animals. There's something about the human body as a body-soul unity that's different from everything else in creation. And so that's evident to him, and it's significant. And John Paul II calls this original solitude, right? That he has this unique, unrepeatable relationship with God. And that's true of every human being. You all have a relationship with God that is specific to you, that no one else has, that no one else will ever have. It's yours. And you live that in and through your body. So your body has a meaning. It reveals that you have a relationship with God. You are unique. No one else is you. No one else is exactly like you. No one else ever will be. So you are you. And then, so the body reveals God, but it also reveals the person. So with our bodies, we cry. We have all these hand gestures going on. We have body language. We have emotions. We have mannerisms. We express when we're happy, when we're sad. We can hug other people. The body reveals who I am as a person. You can see me because you see that I have a body. You can see me, right? It's not like our angels, all of our guardian angels in here that we cannot see because they do not have bodies. But we have bodies so we can be seen. We can be known. So my body reveals me. And then my body also reveals that I'm meant to give myself away. So we have arms that can hug. We have hands that can make gifts or receive gifts. So I'm made to give myself away. And even biologically, right? We could talk about, yes, we all have reproductive organs, but even at the cellular level, we all have gametes that are waiting for another. So biologically, we're made to give ourselves away. We could say that on some level, too, about other aspects of creation, right? That they are also made to give of themselves. So this giving and receiving that's going on is very significant within creation. So one of the big questions, so kind of laying that as groundwork, that the body reveals that we have a relationship with God, and that the body reveals ourselves, and then the body reveals that I'm meant to give myself away. One of the big questions that Hillary and I discussed when we were talking about this, Graham also brought it up. If someone's in a committed, loving relationship, if you're engaged to someone, you know you want to marry them, your wedding's a month away, why does the church say you can't have sex with that person? Why would she say that? When I talked to Father Luke earlier this morning about this, he said, so we can't open our Christmas presents early? Why can't we do that? So maybe you did do that. I did that with my older sister, found some Christmas presents. My mom had all of these clothes that she was going to give away to Goodwill in these big boxes, and all wrapped inside of there were the Christmas presents, and the clothes were on top. And it was very creative of my mom, but not creative enough to get past my sister. So we found the Christmas gifts, and we're looking at the Christmas gifts, and we saw what we were going to get. And it's true, like on Christmas Day, it's a little less exciting because you already saw what you're going to get. And you're like, oh yeah, I already knew that. It took something away. So just to kind of lay out a little bit more, like, why does the church say this? So On a practical level, the church is aware that the reason for sex, the purpose of sex, is that it causes babies, and that the best place for babies is in a marriage, and particularly one that's loving. And so that's a practical reason, right? But that might not be really convincing, especially in our day of lots and lots of ways around babies. So if it's easy to separate those things, then why not? So because of everything that we said before, the body isn't just about biology, right? It's not just about whether or not sex is for babies. It is about that, but it's about so much more, because it's not just simply about my body and whether or not it can have a baby at this moment, or whether or not I can keep it from doing that, or whatever. It's about the fact that my body, again, has a meaning. So I am meant to give myself away. Yes, that's true. But my body also reveals this relationship that I have with God. And this fact that we're meant to participate in his life and in his work. That's what was going on with Adam in the garden, right? He's naming things, and he gets to keep it and be in charge of it and till it and care for it. And so he's participating in the life of God. One of the greatest works of God the Father is to give life. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says, "My Father is working, and I am working also." And he's referring to the fact that the Father is always giving life or welcoming people back to him. Okay, so that's one of his greatest works, is this gift of life. And so we are meant to participate in that, right? In the caring of the garden, in its organization, in its love for it, in the dominion of it, in the naming of it. We're meant to care for it. So if my body reveals not just me and not just my biology, but also the relationship that I have with God, then it means that in sexual intercourse, what I am communicating is not just myself, but also that unique and unrepeatable relationship that I have with God, which is a very profound thing to be able to communicate. So as Graham was giving examples, he mentioned that in anything physical, you're giving something to someone that you cannot get back, sort of like sharing your deepest, darkest secrets. If I'm sharing with someone the very personal and intimate relationship that I have with God, and I'm sharing that through my body, that's not something that I can get back once I've shared it. So I am meant to communicate myself, and I'm also meant to communicate this relationship that I have with God. So sexual intercourse is meant to participate in the very love of God himself, who God is as a triune God of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, in this eternal processions of giving and receiving that is always fruitful. And so sexual intercourse is a participation in that love. And sexual intercourse is one of the greatest signs that we have, one of the greatest ways that we have of participating in that love of God that is free, total, faithful, and fruitful. So, to most radically participate in that love, I have to give all of myself. If I'm not giving all of myself, if I'm withholding something, then I'm not participating in the love of God to the fullest possible degree that I could. So to me, this question about, well, if I know I'm going to marry this person, if it's happening imminently, if I'm confident in that, then why not have sex before I'm married, is also then this question of what a vow means. So how is my life different from the day before my wedding day? And then how is my life different after I say, I take you to honor you and to have for the whole of my life irrevocably, without anyone else, forsaking all others? What does that mean? And contrary to the question, chastity seems restrictive. What that means is that my freedom is so big, it's so huge, that I can hold my freedom in my hands and I can give it to someone else. I can give over the whole of myself. And in some great mystery in holding all of my freedom and all of myself and giving that to someone else, I don't lose myself, but somehow I gain even more. because I'm participating, again, in the very life of God, this gift of myself. I'm doing what he does. I'm in his image and likeness. I'm making a gift. And in doing that, in participating in who he is and his love, he can make that act of sexual intercourse between a married couple so profoundly beautiful, he is there within it, that it can be so fruitful, it is a person. A whole nother being comes out of it, comes out of my giving of myself, of sharing that relationship of who I am and that relationship that I have with God. So kind of what I think of all of this is, if God is who he says he is, if he's the God of love, then we should want to participate in all of that, in all of this bigness of what love is. And so then that means also in all of the tiny little pieces that also make it up, that participate in its fullness. So last April, I ran a half marathon. It was the first time I ever ran a half marathon. And I had called one of my friends who actually had, years ago, she ran actually for the university track team here. And so I was telling her how I was running a half marathon, which she could not believe at all, because I'm not a runner at all. So I called to tell her I'm a runner and I'm running a half marathon. And when I was getting ready to hang up the phone with her, she said to me, enjoy every step of that half. And she was so excited for me, enjoy every step. And when I was running the half marathon, I actually thought of that, like enjoy every step of the half. And it's true that that's a big deal, right? 13.1 miles is a long time to keep running. But it's also, I have to take the first step in order to get to the finish line. And I have to take every step in between that gets me to the finish line. And there is something about enjoying that when you're like, wow, I can't believe that I went from not being able to run at all to being able to run 13.1 miles, and I'm actually doing it. There is a joy, even though it's hard, and even though you're like, oh my gosh, mile 7, here we go. It's still, there's this joy that you have in each and every step that you are taking, because you've worked so hard for what you're doing. Those small steps give life to the finish line, right? It all matters. It all means something. So I think we can apply the same analogously to any kind of physical contact in our relationships. That even learning about the greatness of a kiss, because that particular kiss also participates in what it means to consummate a marriage. So the idea is like, just because I can't go all the way shouldn't mean that these other things are any less. Because I am communicating myself, I am communicating the relationship that I have with God, and it all does participate in this bigger, greater thing. So just a little bit of a practical note, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit in relationship to answering some of the questions. One of the things that the church asks of people who are preparing for marriage is to go through some kind of natural family planning, whether that be, then there's different models and methods and ways that you can do that. One of them is through a Creighton fertility care system. And the Creighton fertility care system has what they call SPICE. And this is the idea that when couples have some grave reason that they do not want to conceive a child, and so they need to avoid all genital contact. So how do they do that? And so this idea of like spicing up the relationship. And the acronym stands for something. So SPICE is developing your spiritual relationship. The S is spiritual relationship. The P is physical relationship. Your intellectual relationship, creative communication, and then emotional and psychological aspects of the relationship. So the idea is, again, kind of like that half marathon and thinking about every little step along the way. That all of these things matter. They mean something, even if they're not the finish line. There's still something that can be enjoyed the whole way through. So the idea is, how can I love the whole person who is maybe at some moments off limits to me in marriage, or maybe is off limits to me because I'm not married, but what are ways that I can learn to love Because if God is love, then what I want to do is to participate in that in its fullest, most beautiful way. So just to kind of wrap up here, what I hope to cast a little bit is that this is a mystery that's far greater than ourselves. And that's the beauty of sex, is that we're entering into something that is so much bigger and so much more beautiful than just what we are, or what our passions are, or what it is that we think that we want. Anything reductive, anything that's about me, anything that fails to see that this is greater than me is going to be unsatisfying. There is no way for it to be satisfying, because we're made for the infinite. We're made for infinite love. That's what we want. And so it should be a joy to spend our life learning to participate in every little aspect of that love and enjoying every tiny aspect of that love. So that's kind of the vision a little bit that I wanted to give you. And then I think we should try to answer some questions that have been given to us. And if you have more questions, feel free to keep writing them and bringing them forward so we can talk about what you want to talk about.
All right, I'll read this one. This one actually pertains to me. How did you and your spouse prepare together for the wedding night, or what the wedding night would be like? So me and my wife went through marriage prep actually with Father Luke, and we had also did the charting as well beforehand to see, when can we have sex, and when can we have sex and not have a child or conceive a child, and when can we have sex and possibly conceive a child. And when we were going through that, we're both young and we both had good jobs, and we were kind of being selfish. We're like, well, I don't know if we really want a kid right now. Maybe we just, follow this, because we're about a month out and we're like, I think you're going to be really fertile during the honeymoon. So this could be a problem. And we talked about more and more. We actually talked about it with Father Luke, and we got to the point where it's like, if we have a kid, great. Like, that's really what a marriage is about. And we were also kind of thinking, like, what's the chances it's going to happen? So we were married on July 24th, and the baby's due April 25th. So if you do the math, that's 9 months and 1 day. So it happened. So, which is great. We were surprised. That's for sure. We both were like, actually, we called her mom and sister, and she was like, were you pregnant at the wedding? She's like, I absolutely was not pregnant. That's how quick it was. So I guess also just with what the first night would be like, we did a lot of talking. We didn't know really what to expect with one another. It's just, it's going to be your spouse. You can kind of talk about anything and just be open with them and truthful. So we did that as well, and we ended up having a kid, so. All right, you can answer a question.
I don't know what to answer. I feel like you're better at all this than I am.
No, just that one. You want to answer another one?
Yeah.
All right. How do you avoid lust in marriage? Well, I've been married 6 months, so I'm no expert. Sean, you can jump in. You've been married much longer. But you're loving your spouse for who they are and as a whole. My wife always tells me her job in our marriage is to get me to heaven. That's her job, is to get me to heaven, and that's what my job should be as well. So I think if you have that in mind, and you're doing what's best, not only for yourself, but for your spouse, and you want the best for them, keep that in mind, and that's the ultimate goal. A lot of things kind of fall by the side of what's important, what's not important in a marriage. So, Sean, you can jump in. I'm no expert, so.
The only thing I would say is, building off of the theme that Molly was going with earlier, with Adam discovering Eve, after naming all the creatures and not being satisfied with any of them, God creates Eve, and he says, finally, this at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. He saw in his wife another image of God. And so I just try to keep that in mind.
Nice.
I think also it's important with, just not lusting over your spouse is, you also have that emotional side. I have to let her tickle me, or I have to, have a deep conversation, take her out to dinner, stuff that it truly is coming from my heart. I don't have any there's no gotcha at the end. So, yeah.
I have one here that says, what is the purpose of emotional chastity? I think actually Graham gave a great answer to that when he gave Hillary's example of the tower. And I think the other idea too, when we're talking about what it is to love a whole person, you need to love the whole person, and we're not simply just emotions, and we're not simply physical. We are a combination of so many things. So really learning to love the whole of the person. I think it's also kind of speaking a little bit from a feminine perspective. I think that emotional chastity is very important for women, because I think for us, it can be a little easier maybe to get more emotionally over-involved even before you're physically involved. So maybe you're already planning the wedding and naming the children, and he's getting dressed for the first date. So
First and last date.
So yeah, I think that it's important to realize that men and women bond differently, and for women, an emotional bond can be very, very incredibly powerful, and can be also very difficult to get over. So it's kind of like that idea of sharing deep, dark secrets. Like, your deep, dark secrets aren't for everybody, just like sex isn't for everybody. And there's a reason for that, because it's something so unique and personal to you, that it's a part of giving the whole of yourself. And you don't give the whole of yourself to everybody. Yeah.
Okay. Is there one thing above all that keeps a marriage from being strained? Again, 6 months only. So I would say, just being honest with your partner is the biggest thing. I think me and my wife try to practice. We're very upfront with one another. And, sometimes we do have we've had tough conversations, but there's no reason to keep that hidden in the shadows or hide something from your spouse. It's tough. There's been times where it's not been fun, having that conversation, but the conversation needs to be had. You don't want to have something that's just kind of eating away at you, or maybe it's eating away at your spouse. You can probably tell when they're holding something back and they're probably trying to tell you something, and just bring it up. Is there something we need to talk about? And maybe that's when you turn the TV off and get ready. So I think, again, Sean, you can jump in. I'm just a rookie, so.
That sounds good to me.
Okay. I'm on the right track then.
So we have some questions about how far is too far when it comes to physical intimacy, and how can I maintain a physical relationship with my significant other while still remaining true to Christ and chaste. So maybe we can have a priest also jump in on that how far is too far comment. As far as, I guess again, what I would say as a starting point is that, as Graham said when he started, that to date someone is to discern marrying them, and to recognize that either they are for you or they are for someone else. And so kind of keeping maybe that a little bit in the forefront of your mind. How do you want to be respected? And if this isn't the person for you, then how would you want, what do you want to leave with, I guess, would be a question. But also, I think it's, again, really important to focus on that idea of loving the whole person. And so developing all of those different aspects of love. So recognizing that there is a spiritual side to it, recognizing that there is a physical side to it, recognizing there's an intellectual side to it, recognizing that communication is another way of bonding, recognizing that there's an emotional and psychological side to it, and trying to doing different activities to try to build those up. So whether it's like walks or movies, or whether it's reading something together, or whether it's working on a specific project together, these are all ways that you learn about another person and learn to love them. So if really the idea is to love somebody, then you want to know everything about them when you love someone. So I guess that's how I would start. I would be interested in a clergy jumping in on the how far is too far wisdom.
Should we rock, paper,
Which questions?
So you can kind of.
One.
I don't know if you have anything to say with those.
Probably somewhat similar to what's already been said, but that I've heard often is that ultimately, if you're asking that question, it's not really the best question to ask, because there's already a desire to take something rather than to give of yourself. And so already, yeah, it's kind of not the best perspective to be looking at. And so I think Molly's point was a good one of looking at ways to how you can plan to spend your time together in ways that will really help you to thrive as a couple and to really bond in deeper ways that will really, help you to thrive. And one answer I've heard to the question also is sort of, I guess not necessarily the how far is too far question, but like, is it time to go to the next level? I think it was Father Mike Schmitz, maybe. I don't know, one of those guys who makes all those fancy tapes and stuff. Anyway, was basically he challenged people to take that from a different angle and say, how can I go to the next level in giving of myself? How can I go to the next level in really loving through sacrificing more for this person that I love? And what does that mean for me? So that's what I would say.
Do you have anything to add?
I think certainly the first, what he said certainly makes sense. You do want to approach it, you don't want to approach the situation like, well, how far can I go without sinning? I think that's a question that we ought not ask, not just in regards to our physical relationships, but you want to avoid the psychology of thinking like, well, I want to know where the line is, and I want to go as close as I can to without sinning. Because again, then you're much more able to objectify the person or even rationalize sin. And religion and our faith becomes very legalistic, right? Well, I didn't violate this specific aspect of some minute point of the law. You want to avoid thinking in that manner. So again, even approaching the question, you as Father Dan said, how can I pursue this relationship in light of God's teaching and out of a true, authentic sense of Christian love. Well, I guess practically speaking, you also, we believe, we're both body and soul, and we believe in faith and reason, and even just using our minds, to think about, well, should avoiding certain situations that might potentially put us in awkward situations. So not having a legalistic mind, so to speak, but again, just using the gift of reason to avoid temptation, or to avoid those situations that might lead to something. So.
Okay, so another question we have is it okay to live with a significant other or fiance if you still remain chaste? I think there's a lot of pieces that go into the living with another person question. Obviously, in our culture, that's becoming more and more common, almost the norm. So much so that a lot of the high school students that I've taught several who didn't know that it was wrong at all to live with someone before you were married to them. I think there's always the question of like whether or not you cause a scandal to other people. That's sort of maybe the most lame reason for not living with someone else, is maybe you will, other people will assume that because you live together, therefore you are sleeping together, therefore you're doing things you shouldn't be doing before you're getting married. Again, I think bigger reasons to think about, again, with this idea that what marriage and sex are are a great mystery to be invited into that reflect the love of God himself. And so anything that falls short of that is not going to be enough for me. And so I think living together and pretending in many ways that you are married when you aren't, even if you're not physically sleeping in the same bed or in the same bedroom or whatever, it seems to me that it's still reductive. It's still not enough. It seems like I'm playing marriage in a lot of these other ways, but I'm not getting the fullness. And what I want is the fullness. And then you have all those questions about emotional chastity and all of those questions about if this doesn't work, if this relationship, if this engagement ends, then who takes the coffee pot and who takes the broken heart and who takes the couch? And it seems to me that it really inhibits, actually, your freedom to give yourself, because you've bound yourself partially to something, and therefore, you know, if I kind of am halfway there, like, why not be pulled all the way along? So it seems to me that it actually doesn't lead to freedom in the greatest possible sense that it could. And I very much like freedom. I think it's just way too important to reduce. And so, yep, it's certainly a greater challenge not to live with someone or to live across town from someone. I know that, Graham and Hillary, you get very annoyed with driving to the other person's house, even when it's 15 minutes away. It seems like forever away. But I think that, yeah, it's just a way of it keeps you from giving the whole of yourself, I think, in a way that you would actually want, deeply desire to give the whole of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, me and my wife, we didn't move in until we got married. We moved her stuff in probably the week before, or actually a couple days before she flew down or out for the wedding. And what was funny is I showed up with the moving truck and she didn't have one box at all. So that was kind of my jumping in, moving her in with nothing or no box. So what has actually been really fun when we were living together now is, I mean, you don't realize I've had a lot of fun just living with her and getting to know her that way. It was something that we kind of saved, and it was almost like, you know, opening up the Christmas presents when we got home even. There was some stuff that, you know, surprised me, or she was annoyed by me. You know, just something simple as like tucking in the sheets. I don't tuck in the sheets. I don't think most guys do either, because I was talking to my brother-in-law, and it was the same thing, because she like has her sheets tucked in on one side and I have mine tucked out, and she gets so mad. And I mean, it was like 2 weeks, and she would like tuck them in and I'd just kick them right out. But what's been great now, since she's pregnant, she has all this extra blood and she's much warmer or hotter. She's been kicking them out too. So it's just something I think, I know when we went through marriage prep with Father Luke, he said, you know, you're playing house early is how he called it if you do that, and it's better just wait. And I agree. It's been a lot of fun and we're still learning about each other, you know, every day on, you know, living with one another. And it's a surprise that, you know, comes up. And I think if we would have lived with each other a year ago or a year and a half ago, it's something that, you know, maybe I would have seen it earlier on, but it's something that I get to look forward to at least. So.
We have a couple questions. One says, how can we combat this culture that glorifies sex and promiscuity? And I think related is, what are some practical ways to talk to friends about this subject without them writing you off? Again, I think it is so important to attempt in some way, shape, or form to cast the vision as big as it is, rather than to reduce it to something. Because it's just true that if we understand human nature and who we really are and what it is that we really want, then none of us want to be used. No one wants to be hurt. No one wants to be trampled on. No one wants to be an object. No one wants to carry around wounds or scars from bad physical, intimate relationships. So I think it's important to kind of show what it's possible to have. And I think that that's really a challenge to do. But I think it's important to try to some degree to see that there's a greater freedom in what the church proposes, and that's the reason she proposes it to her children, because she loves them. And it's not actually that she wants to be restrictive at all, but that she wants your greatest freedom. She wants your greatest love, wants you to participate as deeply and truly as possible in the love of God himself. Yeah. So I think in whatever that means and however that's possible to whomever you're talking to be able to share some of the good news of it. It's not that the church hates sex. It's that it's profoundly beautiful. It's that it's sacred. And that's why it hurts so much when we profane it, because it's sacred.
That was good. Yeah, that's it. What are some things that help with chastity within marriage? I think I already answered that.
I don't know.
I did. Hope I did. I mean, is this more of a clergy questions here?
Put the clergy on the spot.
Yep, clergy's gonna be put on the spot.
Well, I think it's an important question. I don't know if I have anything to say. We'll see. We have two questions that deal with struggling with pornography or masturbation in a relationship. So I think we're going to be going to clergy for help. But again, yeah, I guess I would just start by saying, and I think those who wrote this question clearly know this because they're asking for help, but anything that is reductive of the view of love is unsatisfying. And so the question, I think, and maybe good even not just in the sense of pornography, but also just in healing from sexual sin, period. When I have reduced something, when I have profaned something that is sacred and beautiful, what then? And I think the great news is that you're either here because you're Catholic or you want to be. And confession is a great thing where you can be made new. And you're invited again to participate in this big, beautiful, huge mystery that takes more than a lifetime to figure out how to participate in. So that would be my answer, but clergy comments?
What was the specific question?
Specific questions. I am a girlfriend of someone struggling with pornography, help. And then practicals on healing from the sin of masturbation and pornography while in a relationship.
The relationship aspect, I would say, communication, open, honest communication is always one of the most important things. In terms of healing, I think there's a few sides to it. On one hand, obviously there's forgiveness that needs to happen, but forgiveness goes hand in hand with healing, because if there's something that needs to be forgiven, there's a wound that's been dealt. And things are going to continue to break open that wound. And so that choice has to be continually renewed, and continued honesty and communication both with the Lord in prayer and when appropriate with the other person are important parts of that process. But also, in continuing to break out of, trying to break out of that cycle, if that's pornography and masturbation have become a problem. I think it takes the courage to make the sacrifices that need to be made, to recognize what are the occasions to sin, what are the situations that I've learned. If it's been going on for a while, you probably have a experience to draw from, to notice what are the situations that leave me vulnerable. And just like we were saying in a dating relationship, choosing situations that will really help you to thrive also by yourself, in your times of leisure and your downtime, being intentional about putting yourself in situations that will help you to make good choices and being willing to make the sacrifices to avoid the ones that will lead you to temptation. And also recognizing kind of the movements within your spirit that leave you vulnerable. One acronym that I know was taught to us in seminary to sort of keep your antenna ready for was HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. These are experiences that kind of weaken the spirit and really leave us vulnerable. And often it can happen with other sins too, but when we give into a temptation, we can often look back and realize what was going on in my spirit at the time. Was I hungry? Was I angry? Was I lonely? Was I tired? And the more that you're able to recognize those things and recognize what's going on interiorly, the more you're able to be responsive to what your needs are, rather than falling back on escaping into a habit that's not healthy for you. So those are a few tips that I would offer. I don't know if you would add anything.
Yeah, I would just, everything you said is important. I would just simply add that whenever we're engaged in any type of spiritual battle, we do have to acknowledge our own inability to deal with it. We have to set the parameters and realize, like, I personally simply relying on human strength cannot avoid these sins or even these occasions of sin. This is ultimately a matter of God's grace, and I have to turn to Him and trust in Him. And that is going to entail, a life of prayer. That's certainly the prayer life. And even if you're only praying a little bit, and the prayer might be distracted, and your mind wanders, you have to begin to cultivate a relationship with God. And when you cultivate that relationship with God, then you'll still experience difficulty in your life, but you're able to deal with the difficulties that life throws at you because you're relying on God and His grace. And so, cultivating the prayer life, or whether you're the individual in the relationship that's struggling with these things, or it's someone you're dating, both sides. The prayer life is non-negotiable. You can't circumvent. I've used this example from the pulpit before. It's like, I want to be in great physical health, but I don't want to diet and exercise. Well, you're not going to make. It can't happen. In the spiritual life and making spiritual progress, especially in regards to our sexuality and our sexual identity, the life of prayer, the spiritual life is non-negotiable. And also another thing I think that is very practical in dealing with it, especially if there's been any patterns of addiction, or this is something you've been struggling with for years. It's one day at a time. I remember in the seminary, in order to get certified to go out and to do apostolates, you would have training, and you would watch these training videos of people who had struggled with whether it be sexual addictions or alcoholism or drugs, and I remember they had this one individual who had been sober for 20-some years, and he said, today I choose to be sober. He goes, I'm not talking about tomorrow, I'm not talking about next week, but today. Today, and you can tell, it was a one day at a time. And, I'm like, this guy's been clean for 20 years. What do you mean? Don't buy it now, you have it. And, and just the way he thought, each day I make a choice. Today I'm going to follow God, I'm going to strive to live cooperate with His grace as best I can. And I think in those spiritual battles, and we've all experienced this before, right? This is the last time I'm ever going to confess this sin. And once you say that, look out, because before the dawn doth break, you're probably going to fall. And with that same sin, you're just setting yourself up, because a day is manageable. But the rest of your life, I know statistically speaking, any of us could go at any moment, but for some of us, we could live another 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I'm supposed to go the rest of my life without sinning, and that becomes unmanageable. One day, our Lord Himself will say, today's problems are sufficient in themselves. Okay? The evils that you face, the temptations you face, and so I think just practically speaking, just, that individual who was speaking of sobriety, it really is one day at a time. And again, that being spiritually rooted in Christ, and having that prayer life. You can have the best spiritual director, you can read the best books, you can go on the great pilgrimages, and you can do all kinds of things, but if you're not praying, if you're not, turning to God at least a little bit every day, you're just relying on human strength, and sooner or later that's going put her out. So, and that's not just with, issues of sexuality, although most certainly it is, but I think in all aspects of our spiritual life. If we want to grow, we want to mature, those are things to keep in mind.
The other thing too, because I know part of the question was about the person who's the significant other, the one who is struggling or has struggled with those sins, the healing on that side of that. I think another comment that is important to be made is that it's nearly impossible and to not be affected by that person's sin when you're in a deep relationship, and it's understandable to be hurt and to be affected by that, and you have to realize that that's okay, but at the same time to not take too much ownership of it, to realize that it's not about you, it's not your problem, it's that person's problem. And I think a lot of danger can happen when the significant other puts it on them and sees it too much as a reflection on them, and is not able to make the distinction that this is not a reflection of me, this is not my problem, but is able to make that distinction.
So the next one we have is, I've grown up believing sex before marriage is wrong. However, now that I'm older, I'm not sure if waiting is what I want. But how do I discern what I want from what my parents want? So I guess the first thing is recognizing your own freedom is always a good thing, and you are in control of your life and you get to make your own decisions. And then realizing that you are responsible for those decisions that you do make. And then thirdly, when looking at any human desire, I think it's really important to always understand the real desire, which doesn't necessarily correlate always to what I think I want. But in all of our human longing, what we're always wanting ultimately is some kind of connection with God. It's Him that we're always seeking. And so I think in any of our desires, whether they be disordered or properly ordered, I think it's a good thing to kind of look at how am I going about attempting to achieve this desire? And is this desire really giving me what I'm made for, which is God? Or is it giving me something less than what I'm made for? I'm going to give that to the clergy.
Okay, and then we got one more for the clergy.
Before you get to the next question, how many questions do you have left?
That's it.
Last question.
Okay, great.
Okay. Clergy. What if I never want to get married, but don't want to stay a virgin my whole life?
Okay, well.
That's what I gave it to you.
I would say this, as they talked about before, when sex isn't just something you do, but it's something you say. And in the sexual embrace, you're saying, I'm only yours, I'm always yours, and I am forever yours. Okay? So, in doing that, obviously, that's something that you only truly want to say to your spouse. And if you are under the impression that you can somehow, again, engage in a relationship I'm trying to word this probably a bit clearly. The church in teaching this and handing on this teaching, we want you to have a healthy, happy, holy life and to spend eternity with God. And because, again, sex includes all of that, what I just said, the seriousness, the gravity of that, it ought not be misused. And in saying that, I just want to have sex, but I don't want to have the commitment of marriage, not only would you be living a lie, but you would also, you're also setting yourself up for, I think, a greater spiritual battle, greater spiritual difficulties than you all have. It is normal, obviously, to have attractions and feelings and certain urges that you think to yourself, boy, wouldn't it be nice to act upon that? But we're not just pure emotive beings. We know this in our life, right? We don't just act purely on our emotions and our feelings. It plays an important role. I'm not saying that we have to ignore our feelings and our emotions. No, we pay attention to them. But by the same token, if we just solely relied on our emotions and our feelings, society would cease to function. You'd go around, hitting people, and if we just exclusively relied on emotion and feeling. But for some reason, again, in society, when it comes to sex, we have this notion. I'm not just saying we in this society. We have this emotion like, well, I shouldn't restrain those. I should feel free to act upon them. So again, to the person in that question, I would say, I think it's good that even though you have these questions, and that's fine, and you don't quite understand this fully yet, that's fine as well. We all have struggles, but I would just be very cautious in that. Should you continue down this course, you could potentially be setting yourself up for a very real spiritual and emotional, psychological battle. If you try to divorce it to, well, I'm just going to have fun and objectify someone, but I'm going to completely remove that from the sacrament of marriage. There's going to be consequences for that obviously the church would ideally like you to avoid. So, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
That was very well said. The only thing I would add is simply that I would encourage us all to think about the fact that whatever vocation we're called to selflessly make our lives a gift for others. And so if we're starting from the premise that I don't want to get married, but I want to have sex, ask yourself, how can that possibly fulfill that goal?
And what I should have also added to that, sorry, I know this is like the third time I've just added one more thing. but we also, as people of faith, we believe that because I incorporate this like into every wedding homily I've given. If God has called you to a specific vocation, if God has called Graham and Hillary to be together, and we believe that He has, then He will give them the grace they need to live their married life. It won't always be easy. They'll still have the cross. There'll still be difficulties. But He will give them the grace and strength they need to live their vocation. If God has called Daniel Gifford to be a priest, we believe that He will give him the grace and strength he needs to live his vocation as fruitfully as a celibate. Might not always be easy. There might at times be a cross entailed. But as people of faith, we believe that God is very operative in our life, and His grace is operative. So that's the other thing to remember. If you're in figuring out your vocation, or you're thinking like, well, I just want sex, but I don't want to get married. Like, okay, we need to go back to the starting. We need to go back a few steps. Where is God calling you? Where do you think He might be calling you? And to begin to discern in one of several directions, because we believe that ultimately we'll get there's an imbalance, and in coming to discern your vocation and developing a prayer life, we can kind of get that balance back, where you can say, okay, well, these urges, these feelings I have, I think God is calling me to do this properly and chastely in a fruitful Christian marriage, and I need to begin to pursue that. Or these feelings or urges, maybe God is telling me He wants me to be fruitful, but to do so in a priestly or religious vocation. So when you ask that question, you might need to take a few steps back and say, okay, let's kind of readdress the question and try to get a little bit more balance. So.
All right. Well, can we thank our guests? Molly and Graham, I really appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom with us. I thank all of you for being here as well. And I've got one request. If you could be so kind, I'm going to pass these around. This helps us to know, as we plan for the next Busy Person retreat, what you guys enjoyed, what you thought of the talks, what things you would tweet, other things you'd like to hear. So I'm going to hand out these of this on each side. If you guys could each take one, and if you're able to fill it out before you leave, if you want to just put on the cart, that gray cart on your way out. So tonight, our topic was very much about living relationships and the sexual dimension of relationships to the fullest. for our final day of the Busy Person Retreat tomorrow, we're going to talk about maybe when relationships don't go as we had planned. So Anne-Marie Grummer is going to offer a talk 3 times tomorrow, once at 11, once at 1, and once at 5. Is that correct? Okay. And then in the evening, Father Luke, those 3 talks will be in the Elson dining room. You can bring your lunch, eat while you listen. That's perfectly fine.
They're half an hour.
They're half an hour each, right? It'll be the same talk offered all 3 times, half an hour each. At 7 p.m., back in this room, Father Luke is going to give a talk aptly named Have a Nice Life. So he's going to talk about maybe when friendships don't go the way that we had preferred, how to deal with that. So that'll be our offerings for tomorrow for the last day of our Busy Person Retreat. Again, thank you for coming. And maybe if Father Jim could close us with a short prayer.
Sure. All right. Stay seated. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Lord God, we thank you for this opportunity to gather to discuss your plan for humanity, your plan for creation, and your desire for us to share in the incredible divine love that is within you, Father, Son, and Spirit. We ask that you bless us as we go our separate ways. May we take the knowledge and communication that you have provided us this evening to learn how to truly love one another, to build up your kingdom, and to live lives as your sons and daughters. May we always know of your love. May the saints and angels intercede for us. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Go in peace.